Mount Vesuvius is very mean to people.
Correct. Yeah. Well, what happened to Mount Vesuvius?
Vesuvius was very angry at them.
Yeah, and it spit out a bunch of stuff.
Like this.
Yeah. And then what happened? What happened to all the people in Pompeii when Vesuvius erupted? They died. Do you want to see some of their bodies?
Yeah.
History, I'd like to follow me down the rabbit hole. History, I'd like to, frankly, I want to know.
Hello and welcome to HILF, History I'd Like to Fuck with Dawn Brody. I'm Dawn Brody. Now in August of 2022, my husband, Andrew Melby, and everyone, including me, calls him Melby, and my 4-year-old daughter, Beatrice, went on a 16-day trip through Italy. Oh, it was the first visit for all of us, and we had spectacular visits planned from Venice to Amalfi, but I had only one cannot miss on my list. Pompeii, the ancient city destroyed by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD, and one of my all-time HILFs. I was so fucking excited to see it. And on the day we got there, it was over 98 degrees, but still packed, because it turned out it was the one day a month that it's free to the public. And it had been over 100 degrees almost every day that we had been in Italy. All of Europe was enduring an increasingly common record-setting summer. We had taken a train, then a taxi to get there. We had checked our 2 weeks' worth of luggage in a temporary locker, and then tried to explain to our daughter that this was not just a hot dust field full of broken buildings. There were also dead people in there. And it was great. It was hot and sad and surreal and so great. And I always knew that I wanted to do an episode on HILF of Pompeii. And when the prospect of me actually visiting the place arose, I knew I'd wait until I'd seen it in person to record it. And by then, the guest for this episode was obvious. The guy who carried our kid on his shoulders in that heat, my husband, total DILF, Melby. Now, at the time that we record this, we had been back from the trip for about 5 weeks. I still have my tan lines and a few euros in my purse. Thank you for joining us for the HILF of Pompeii. Get ready to be blown away. Here we are. We're back at the microphones together.
And I'm just as uncomfortable as I was before.
You look gorgeous. Let me just say that. I know it's a podcast. Nobody can see you. But you were like the hottest guy ever.
Jeez.
And you're at your own kitchen table with me, your loving wife. Mm-hmm. But you do get nervous when we hit record. Why do you think that is?
I don't know. Because I am thinking too much. I need to relax and just talk.
Yeah. Do you want to get naked? Or do you want me to get naked?
There it is.
Okay,
That's much better.
I know how to calm you down, sweetheart.
Well, I don't know if that's calming me, but I don't know.
Oh, well, either way, you get nice and focused. Now, some of you listening, you know this guy. Not only do I mention him every once in a while, but he was my guest on episode 5 on Krampus last year. You were excellent. It was a record-breaking episode.
But it wasn't the best.
Well, we don't, I like to think of my episodes as like my children. It's
You
not
only
really
have
about,
one.
I only ever will love one. And it was the first one. And the rest are just kind of flunkies.
Got it.
And you were number 5, which is pretty good. Pretty up there. But if you are meeting him for the first time, he is Andrew Melby, my husband. He is originally from Minnesota. His job is at Netflix. He's got a cool-ass job at Netflix. He rides a Harley. He likes to camp. He's got a sexy beard. He makes beer. He grows dope. He's not above a tiara and a glitter party. I mean, this guy's fucking... I feel like I know you too well to introduce you. Like, I wouldn't... Like, I don't... How do you... When you meet someone new, how do you introduce yourself?
I'm honestly, this is like the worst thing in the world for me.
I know you hate this stuff. You hate small talk.
I say, hey, I'm Melby. How you doing? And then if they want to know more, they can ask. I'm not an open book by nature, but
Okay.
I'm happy. I'm very personable and easy to chat with. But I just these hypotheticals just like freeze me up.
Yeah, that's okay. You know why? Because that's why we're a good mix. Because I never shut the fuck up. Is that why? Do you think you were attracted to me because you saw a future in which you'd never have to talk again.
Yeah. Yeah, essentially. I mean, I think when we walk into a party, I know who's like sort of leading the conversation. I wouldn't say I'm terribly socially awkward, but I don't necessarily find myself comfortable all the time. And so having
yet
someone...
the people who know you well will describe you as one of the funniest guys they know.
Sure. And it's a great compliment. But I think in like a social situation, I'm, outside of professional, it's nice when someone else is leading, I guess,
You're a great listener.
Thanks.
I mean, I don't quiz you, but you do seem to retain some of the things that I say.
Despite my educational background.
Yes. You have a beautiful educational background and very little debt.
That's true.
In your educational background.
That's true.
Listen, we, as I've already told my listeners, just back. I mean, we're fresh off the trail. We still got some of our sand in our shoes from the Amalfi coast from our trip to Italy. Mm-hmm. And when we went, you and me and Beatrice, to Pompeii on that hot-ass day, I feel like we went in with kind of the same level of knowledge on the place. Like, I had gotten my book, but I feel like we both kind of knew the brochure summary, right?
I mean, you definitely knew more than me, despite having read. I sort of just assumed, I had thought that they were covered in lava.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a terribly uncommon misconception.
No.
That they were just covered in lava, and that's not the case.
No, a volcano erupted and an entire village was destroyed.
I mean, I looked at where Vesuvius was in relation to Pompeii, and I thought, boy, that lava has to go pretty far.
Yeah, that must have been
a lot of it.
Must have been a lot of it.
An exciting day, and it was
Yeah.
like, oh no, dum-dum, that's not how it worked.
Yeah.
And then it made it worse in some ways.
Yeah, because lava just burns you up.
Yeah,
We've seen Terminator 2. You give a thumbs up,
and it's done.
call it a day.
But this like slow asphyxiation of ash.
Ooh,
well,
there's worse ways to go than asphyxiation.
Checks notes.
Yeah. Well, I remember having questions, and I remember you asking me questions, and I remember hearing questions, none of which I could answer because I didn't know, and it was too hot to fucking find out there. I mean, do you remember how hot it felt? I mean, it was that, like, people were scuttling and sort of jockeying to just get, like, a corner of shade from, like, a flagpole, is what I remember.
From an aerial view, it would look like rodents scattering from a hawk. No one was out in the open. It was just, like, to the point where your brain starts limiting its functions in order to preserve. And I don't mean that like dramatically. I mean like just sort of it was checking in, and it was like, oh, it's 105 degrees and humid. We're not gonna. Language is secondary right now.
Yeah.
And you definitely started just sort of like.
Yeah.
Again, we weren't dying at Vesuvius.
No, it was like the second worst day at Pompeii.
It was ironic.
It was pretty bad though.
It was funny to walk around and just be like, oh my God, it's so hot. I mean, I could literally die.
Yeah, and you're like the ghosts of Pompeii are like, eat a dick. You don't know shit. And I remember like I didn't have the wherewithal to like look anything up. And they also didn't have out in the city, gratefully, huge kiosks or like things that are going to explain them to you really easily. So I tried to make a list of some of the questions I had walking around the site that I was like, girl, I wish I knew this now and I got to look it up. When did they uncover this place? We know that Vesuvius blew in 79 AD, but when did they go, oh, this is down here? Were there survivors, eyewitnesses? Because I was like trying to look around like, boy, I mean, what was it like? How long did it take for like, from the time you saw the ash cloud to it hitting the town? And were there some people that could like describe what that was like? And then how far did the damage go? Like Naples is obviously totally fine, but like, it's not like they were covered in a little bit of ash. It didn't get that far. So how far did it go? And then we didn't know. And I couldn't look it up. But then you may recall that the next couple days as I'm getting through my book, I would sort of pop my head up over a martini and be like, oh, did you know that so many refugees from Pompeii went to Amalfi? They got a tax break from the emperor. And you would say, that's very interesting. You should save that for the podcast, baby. That's podcast stuff. And I was like, okay, I will. And I wrote it down, and here we are.
Bookmark it.
Yay! So first I'm going to tell you about my sources. This book, which I have, as you can see, I'm handing it to my husband. It is The Complete Pompeii by Thames and Hudson. It's got lots of pictures, and this goes through everything from what daily life was like in Pompeii to the discovery to the science of the eruption. It's great. And I've put little Post-its in all the real sexy pictures.
2 questions. Why is there like a train conductor on the cover, dressed in like turn of the century, like a British train conductor?
Sure. Well, that's because this has been a tourist destination for centuries. I don't think he's necessarily a train conductor, but
Sure
perhaps
looks like
you're
it.
noticing a British mid-19th century sort of costume, which would make sense. There were tourists then visiting the place.
It's a weird thing to put on the cover of your Complete Pompeii book. I don't know if they're still taking notes.
I'm sure they are. Why don't we'll email Thames and Hudson. I watched some documentaries that were real sexy. There's a lot of cool people that like to talk about Pompeii online. And I read some very cool scientific journals. We will have links to those on our Instagram. You can go and check them out and see there's cool photographs from 1860 and the 1930s. It's very cool. So here's my plan for the hilfing of Pompeii, my darling.
I'm listening.
First, I'm going to explain what is Pompeii. For those people who are like, this sounds like a place, I should know what this is. I'm going to give you the very kind of quick and dirty what the fuck so you know why we give a shit. Then I'm going to go through the eruption girl, a la Titanic. I've found some incredible sources that can really piece together what that day, the 2 days, was like when Vesuvius first blew up, what it looked like, what it felt like. And then we're going to go through some of my favorite, the most amazing, sexy, interesting discoveries that they made in the Pompeii site.
Does it include the picture of this fella here with a support bracket for his hog?
He's got a dick. My husband's looking at a picture of this guy. His dick is so big, it goes past his knees, and you'll notice there, darling, he's weighing it on a scale.
Oh, that's what it is.
He's weighing it against a pile of money there. See how much it's worth.
Good for him, but that is an ugly.
It's an ugly dick, but
ugly dick.
sometimes, size matters, but ugh. Okay, so what is Pompeii? Pompeii, it is a current town. It exists on a map. It has about 25,000 people in it, and it's a lovely little town in Italy. People are not going to hang out in Pompeii. If you say to Google, even if you Google Maps, hey, take me to Pompeii, it's going to be like, you mean like Pompeii? Or do you mean like Pompeii? Because most people are going to the ancient archaeological site just outside the existing city of Pompeii, in which almost 3 million tourists visit that place every year, which seems crazy because it's really, the entrance is smaller than a strip mall. And people who've never stepped foot in a museum and who don't give a shit about history will raise an eyebrow when you start talking with any depth about Pompeii. It captures the imagination, and one of the main reasons why is the bodies. Mm-hmm. The bodies. Because, as Melby said, Vesuvius, it wasn't just that Vesuvius destroyed these cities when it erupted. It's the way it destroyed them. Those hot gases and ash came down the mountain. People were sort of frozen in time. It was this snapshot. And the ash fell so fast that it's a time capsule. It is fucking amazing.
So it did stop him mid-motion because I didn't see any people there. Mm-hmm. We're rocking through this hot hellhole.
Yeah.
And I say, where are the bodies? Where are the things, that you come to see?
Yeah.
And they're there, but they're not out in the city. They're under glass, of course, in a crowded ass museum, part of it. All worth it. But I just sort of expected sort of walk through this place, sort of like a zoo.
Yeah.
And there's exhibits along the way in the city. And it's
Right.
just not, you're sort of walking around,
Yeah.
knocked over
all
pillows.
Of the bodies, all of the basic, when you walk in, it is very much just floorboards and shallow walls. All of the really cool stuff, with the exception of a couple of frescoes that are still on the walls, murals and stuff, everything has been removed. And out of necessity, because there was just even glass. You felt that, nothing can survive out there. Once it was exposed from the ash, it's like a ticking clock, right? Here's what happened to the residents of this city on the day of the eruption. And it's crazy how prevalent Vesuvius is pretty much everywhere in southern Italy. Like it is the most prominent thing in the background. So it's really easy to imagine, especially once you've been there, that Vesuvius shoots something up. Everybody notices. Now, I want to tell you that the sources for this, what happened on the day of the eruption, come from two primary sources. One is a guy named Pliny the Younger, who witnessed it himself, and his adopted uncle, Pliny the Elder, was there. So some of it we're hearing from his first-person account, and then it's all backed up and kind of augmented by the scientific record, so we can kind of see what happened next when no one was around. Okay. So the morning of the explosion, the morning of the eruption, is fairly pleasant. We believe it was a day in August, so not around the same time that we were there. But that is, people always dispute back and forth. August or September, there were some coins found and some seeds and whatever, but it's give or take fall. And at about 11 a.m., there is a shot of white steam from the top of Mount Vesuvius. The Pliny family is in their house about 18 miles away from Pompeii, and they see it right away and are like, holy shit. Pliny the Younger is a writer. Pliny the Elder is the guy who wrote natural history, which is he's the father of the encyclopedia. He's into botany and zoology, and he's written a ton of shit, but the only thing that exists in its entirety is this natural history.
And he has one of the best IPAs named after him in the country.
And let's not forget how many great day buzzes you can get under his
while
auspices.
Thinking of him.
It's a primo honor. I'm sure he would have been delighted by it.
Absolutely.
And there's been a couple of earthquakes. And one of the first things, this is what fascinated me, one of the first things that everyone is like stunned by is Vesuvius is a volcano? They didn't know it was a volcano. It was just a mountain. It had not erupted in 700 years. So, a first shock. This white hot steam lasts for give or take an hour, and at noon, there's another big, felt, visible explosion of more ash. It would have gone from like white steam to like a dark cloud, and in that cloud is ash and pumice, a really like light, porous stone. And at this point, Pliny the Elder, who is a scientist and a writer and a scholar and has got a ton of money and has got a ton of boats, is like, what's going on over there? As he's got his boat together and he's heading down to shore, he gets an urgent message from a friend of his who lives in one of the villages between Pompeii and another village you're going to hear me talk about, Herculaneum, who is like, shit's real. We need help. We need escape. Some of our ships are already on fire or sinking because of the stones. Rescue immediately. So he goes from curious scientist to like urgent rescue mission and heads to Vesuvius. While he's setting sail, and for the next several hours, this ash and this pumice continues to come down at a rate of 6 inches an hour. So for those of us who have lived in winter climates and can imagine snow, which I think is probably the closest thing to imagine in your mind is some kind of snow, is 6 inches an hour is fucking fast. Mm-hmm. And you woke up and just realized that Vesuvius is a volcano and this is happening. With every hour, it gets harder to open a door. It gets harder to pull a cart down the street. It's, and the roofs start to get heavy and start to collapse. And the sky is dark, dark, dark. And what light does come through is red, red, red. I mean, what do you do? I mean, what would you do? I mean, do you run? Do you hide? Do you try to get your shit? What do you do?
Yeah, I definitely leave. Especially after the first bout of ash falls, I'm out of there. I know you can only walk and like who knows how far, but I don't see the situation getting better. I'm not blaming anyone that stayed. No. But I'm a hoofer.
You're hoofing it.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And here's the thing. There was a huge earthquake 16 years earlier. In 64 AD, a lot of Pompeii was destroyed by a massive earthquake. And they had already experienced the buildings falling down. So there was a certain amount of like, it's just safer out of town. Like whatever's going on here, the building isn't going to fall on you. And you're not going to get trapped in the street. So just get out of town. So everyone, as many people as could, obviously did. Pliny the Elder gets to the shores to go and save his friends. And like I said, it was hours and hours and hours. And not every place experienced the same amount of fall at the same time. He gets to his friend. I believe the friend he actually went to rescue got on a boat and got out. But Pliny the Elder dies. There is enough hot, poisonous gas. He goes down to the shore and is carried by friends and ultimately dies. They find his body the next day. He had suffocated in the ash and the gas. And Pliny the Younger and his mom, in the meantime, are sitting here 18 miles away. And at first it looks like one of those, oh no, that looks really terrible. I hope everyone's okay. It is getting a little closer. It is getting a little closer. And even the people in their town, which is not far from Naples, but closer to Vesuvius, start to get like, we got to go. Like, we should go. And he, at one point, gets scolded by a guy who walks by. He's like, what the fuck are you doing? Get the, So he starts to go. And this is the scene that he describes as the ash starts to fall, even just in minuscule amounts compared to obviously what happened in Pompeii. You could hear the shrieks of women, the wailing of infants, and the shouting of men. Some were calling their parents, others their children or their wives, trying to recognize them by their voices. People bewailed their own fate or that of their relatives, and there were some who prayed for death in their terror of dying. Many besought the aid of the gods, but still more imagined there were no gods left, and that the universe was plunged into eternal darkness forevermore. And that's from a fucking guy who went home at the end of the day and was like, cleaned his bed off and was like, that was scary.
Yeah, that's not great.
Not great.
Not into that.
So bad darkness. At about 4 a.m., 6 a.m., the second day, anyone who was still alive in Pompeii, who had survived a falling building, who had managed to stay on top of the ash, who was still breathing, had the final blow, which is this pyroclastic blast of hot gas, like 750 degrees hot gas, just basically freezes you in place, liquefies your body, and at the same time covering you with 10 more feet of ash. And poof. Now, in the following days, of course, you've got a couple more earthquakes. You've got some refugees. You've got people who are like, holy fucking shit, Vesuvius blew up those cities. Then a few weeks go by. Then months, years, centuries go by. And just to give you some context about how much time goes by, if you got your ass pyroclasted down there in Pompeii and there's 20 feet of ash above your frozen body, you've got Rome falling. You've got the Goths invading about in 250 AD. In the 400s, there were a few more explosions and a few more layers of ash come down. Then you've got the Dark Ages. That's about 500 years. Then Columbus, Galileo. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, literally the tides of history turning above you. In 1709, dude is digging a well for his new beautiful vineyard down there in lovely southern Italy. And his bucket brings up marble and a little piece of a statue. Buddy descends down into the hole. This, I cannot imagine. And finds himself inside the theater of Herculaneum. Herculaneum is a small village outside of Pompeii. Beautiful architecture, the ancient, gorgeous opulence of Rome. And he's like, holy shit. And he takes the marble. He sends up a bunch of statues, of course, sells them, gives them to all the important people. And I'll spare you some of the history we don't have time to go over. But Italy at this time, it's the Spanish, and then the French rule it, and then the Austrians are in charge of part of it, and then the French come back, and then different parts of Austria, and all of this kind of people are trading Pompeii, but already there's tourists, right? So you could, for the right price, with your lady friend, get a torch and follow some guy down there and be like, this ancient hidden city, this, buried underground. And then in 1860, Italy unifies. And we got some Italians up in this site, finally, right? And a guy I think you're really going to like, his name is Giuseppe Fiorelli.
Brilliant.
Our buddy Giuseppe is in charge. And here's what Giuseppe does. He gets, first of all, you pay a fee to visit this place.
That's right.
Which on the one hand, you're like, oh, it's good. But it means anyone can pay a fee, right? Because these fucks were paying somebody to get down there anyway. Right. And now it's like, you pay me, and the money goes into the archaeological site.
How did he take it over? Was this like, this became state property at that point?
It's fascinating. The guy was sort of in charge of unified Italy, which is Garibaldi, he's given out jobs, right? So, all right, unified Italy, now all this stuff is our responsibility. You're the guy in charge of Pompeii, which is actually really interesting because the first guy that he put in charge of Pompeii is Alexander Dumas, who is the French author of The Three Musketeers and The Man in the Iron Mask.
It's a real small world out there.
Yeah. And everyone was like, he's French. And they were like, I know, but he's good French. He like gave us a bunch of weapons to help fight the bad French, the Bourbons. And they were like, yeah, but he's still French. He can be in charge of Pompeii. Get the fuck out of here.
No, I immediately was felt for my man with the winery.
Yeah.
You know, he's just like thinking, it's 17 blue.
Yeah.
I'm going to just grow grapes and make some wine. No one's mad at me. I'm just making wine in a hill.
Who hates wine on a hill?
And then he's like, oh, look, an ancient city. Fuck. Because now, you know, eminent domain, someone's taking this. So you can't just like continue to grow grapes on top of this thing.
No,
so
absolutely
I
not.
want to know what, you know.
Absolutely. And like King Charles, they were like, hey, lovely statue.
Yeah, he's got to go up. He's got to go up the hill further.
Yeah. I'd
It's
like to
just
give that to my daughter.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
This dude, I mean.
Yeah. So now, and they couldn't really, my understanding is they never really got a lot of that early stuff back. But at least as of 1860, it's Italy's and they can kind of make it a historical site and not just like parse it out to rich people. He starts to set up like an archaeological school. And here's the clincher. Is our buddy Giuseppe gets them plaster casts. So Pompeii's and Herculaneum, already sexy as fuck because they're just hidden, ancient, you know, centuries old cities that have been buried under ash forever. And there's wealth and there's treasures and this is great. And they know there's these mounds. They find these mounds of things. The way I imagine it is kind of like the eggs in Alien, right? Mm-hmm. There's these mounds. And sometimes, and they at first they were thinking, oh, sure, a bunch of ash probably fell on like something rich, a vase or some statue or something. And they open, and there'd be nothing in there. It'd be a hollow shell. Mm-hmm. Or there'd be like some organic kind of fragments at the bottom. And they were like, it's nothing. But our buddy Giuseppe used to be a numismatist. Pop quiz, Melby. Do you know what a numismatist is?
I would say something to do with a specific aspect of mathematics.
That makes sense. Numa. Yeah. It is somebody who studies coins, but more specifically, Giuseppe made casts of coins. So Buddy's already...
That's a made-up job.
A numismatist? I had to... No, it's
job.
not. I looked it up, and I had to write out how you pronounce it.
Casts of coins.
Casts of coins, sure, because you got to make,
They're coins. Just let them be.
You got
cast them.
No, you got it because whose face is on it and what year is on it. How much is it worth? You have to put your image on a coin. He was one of the people who figured out how to make casts of coins.
I thought he was just like dipping them bad boys to preserve them. I'm like,
no, he's making he was a new
prints.
So he's a coin guy who knows how to make casts. So you can have your king or your emperor.
That makes
or
much
your
more
whoever.
sense.
Yeah. So he's a numismatist, and so he's already got that part of his brain that's like, well, you could probably fill it with something and see what was in there, right? Mm-hmm. So they little tiny holes. They fill it with plaster. They let it dry. They peel the plaster off. And it isn't just that they see the shape of a human body inside. They see the expression on their faces. You can see the way their hands are twisted together. In some instances, you can see the clothes that they're wearing. It is absolutely incredible. Here is an eyewitness in 1893 who watched Giuseppe make one of these first plaster casts. It is impossible to imagine a more affecting scene than the one suggested by these silent figures, nor have I ever heard of a drama so heartrending as the story of the family in the last days of Pompeii. I just think it's so fucking great. So here's just to give you perspective. So the population of the city of Pompeii, when Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD, was about 11,000. They discovered about 1,100 victims, which if that's representative of how many people were there when it all fell to shit, that's pretty good. That means that the vast majority of the people did exactly what you said you'd do, which is get the fuck out of there as quickly as 100%. They could. Yep. Of the 1,100 human remains that they found, they made 86 plaster casts, and that includes a dog and some horses. And when we come back from the break, I'm going to tell you about some of the most interesting figures to have emerged from those plaster casts.
Terrifying.
Gross, right?
Super gross. It's not
sad.
Not for me. Yeah, it's pretty dark.
Are you glad you didn't know this when you were there, or do you think you would have kept it in your back pocket and felt differently?
No, I definitely would have preferred to know it. It would have put a perspective around my bitching on the heat.
You were very well behaved. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Hal Loveland.
And I'm Mark Gagliardi.
And we're the hosts of We Got This with Mark and Hal, the weekly show where we settle the debates that are most important to you.
That's right. What arguments are you and your friends having that you just can't settle?
Apples or oranges?
Marvel or DC?
Fork versus spoon?
Chocolate or vanilla?
Best bagel?
What's the best Disney song?
We Got This with Mark and Hal. Every week on Maximum Fun, we do the arguing so you don't have to.
Oh, all answers are final for all people for all time.
We got this.
Introducing my mom and dad, Don Brody,
And
Melby.
yeah. My friends, before we jump back into the most remarkable discoveries from Pompeii, a request to please show the pod some love and leave us a rating and a review wherever you listen. It's the stuff, man, that raises eyebrows and gives us the algorithms that ensure we're fucking history long into the future. Also, a reminder that you can see pictures of all the plaster casts and art we discuss and find links to my research on our Instagram at HILF Podcast. And while you're there...
Follow me, follow me, follow me, follow. Follow me, follow me, follow me, follow.
What are you looking at there?
Seems to be a glossary or an index of the various options you have for coitus in the Pompeii of the day. Lots of options.
Lots of options.
We have more today, but this is pretty advanced.
Pretty advanced, pretty forward.
Yeah, and
forward-looking.
it seems fairly equitable as well.
Yeah. Do you remember when you first heard about Pompeii, when it first entered your consciousness?
Oh, I'm sure it was like high school social studies, but
Yeah.
I understood the basics.
I feel like even your like head down, just like feverishly coloring in your Metallica like logo on the cover of a notebook, you kind of cock an eyebrow when the teacher's like, and then.
Yeah, I mean, if you're like a metalhead or something, especially that's pretty metal.
Yeah.
Sky full of ash and frozen bodies, I think, is a Metallica line.
Is it?
I am sure it is.
You know what it probably is. I mean, Iron Maiden, all that stuff.
I'm sure they have a song of stupid about
There's
Pompeii.
yeah.
This band's terrible.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You don't like Metallica?
I think Metallica's fine, but they just like, I think when they had to go to the well for stuff to fill out an album, they're like, just write a song about Pompeii. I was like, all right, what are we gonna do? And it's like basically just say what happened in Pompeii, but like with metal. And it's like,
Yeah, but that's kind of
stupid.
like I basically say what happened in Pompeii, but with the F word.
Yeah, this is a podcast. This is a discussion. This is not music. It's different. I think it's corny when people talk about history things. It's not a good blanket. Strike it from the record.
I strike it from the record. No one needs to hear this. It's a bad take. It's a bad take.
It's a bad take. Here's what I'll say about Metallica, which is what we're here to talk about. And this is I'm not gonna make a lot of friends here.
All right.
My favorite Metallica is the Metallica with the orchestra. So that should tell you everything you need to know
But
about.
don't you feel like an orchestra is the musical version of them talking about Pompeii? It's metal combined with something sort of elevated and sophisticated.
No, not at all. Because it's sonically, it's fantastic.
I don't know. I was same.
I thought
Enter
it was
Sandman. I know it was like a I loved bad poetry and talking about my feelings. So Enter Sandman was my like da, da, da,
No, listen, I think they're good, and there's Metallica comes on, I'm into it, but I think sometimes it's all a little corny. It's just like it's all very like, I don't know, because I don't mind it in literature or in films, but in music, it's like, God, you're taking yourself so seriously with like, just like never learned. Like,
Okay.
I don't know, fella.
All right.
Like, and your bassist or your drummer sucks.
Yeah. All right, my God, this has been. I didn't know. Speaking of, the guy dug as well and brought up marble. I feel like I just dug a well and brought up some unexpected treasures myself.
I don't hate Metallica. I'd have a Metallica vinyl around for the odd occasion, but I'm not.
You were not the kid writing in the notebook. What
No,
was
I
on the
wasn't
cover?
bad.
What band were you coloring in the logo?
It was equal. It was just a different generation of band. It was like Korn,
Sure.
a lot of punk stuff. Refused, a bunch of obscure shit that everyone's just gonna be like, what is that? And it's not.
I think I was writing myself love letters from imaginary vampires. So
We're pretty much saying the same
pretty
thing
much,
here.
we were basically doing the same thing. Do you want to hear about these naked dead dudes or what?
Yeah, sure.
All right, so here's
Thought you'd never ask.
so these are my I don't know I don't want to put my plaster cast dead people in any sort of hierarchy. Like they're all devastatingly depressing and they're all beautiful in their own way. But I'm starting with the Garden of Fugitives. You're going to find that from here on out, as I describe the discoveries, the amazing discoveries that they found once they've continued to explore Pompeii and Herculaneum, there are some crazy names, the way the archaeologists and the various people who have discovered these places, because they were sort of making it up. You know, this seems like a garden. Maybe they found a fragment of a name, so they just name it after a name, or maybe they see a picture of a god on the wall, so it's like the Dionysus room or whatever. This is called the Garden of Fugitives, but nothing that I read indicated that the victims found there were implied to be prisoners or in any other way sort of identified as fugitives themselves. And there was this one particular guy who was sort of in charge of the plaster casts for about a decade named Miorelli, who everything that he wrote to describe the plaster casts is impossibly imaginative. Like, he would be like, the mother already weakened from childbirth. And you're like, it's a female with a child. And like, I am a mother with a child, but like my child can be with a lot of other women. You know what I mean? He made a lot of leaps, is what I'm saying, in terms of implying what people were doing.
Dramatic.
But what else are you going to do?
All right.
The Garden of Fugitives was an area that was discovered near a back gate. And this guy, Miorelli, whether or not who knows how accurate he was, some of the things he said make a lot of sense, which is this was a large group of people. It was one of the largest groups of people discovered together. And it appears that they were in a group trying to get over this back wall. They were on top of already a sizable amount of ash. So they had already managed to keep on top of the ash, to not get hit by a falling building, to not be stuck in a building when it collapsed, to not be run over by a wagon. Like, they're doing pretty good. Like, if we're watching the action film of the Garden of Fugitives, we're rooting for them. The merchant is the guy who's sort of leaning up on his arm. And I encourage, of course, all of you to go and check out these pictures, because I'm going to describe them as the best I can. But imagine a man made out of stone who's sort of climbing out. He's resting his weight on his elbow of one hand, and you can see his face is up. He is one of the only plaster casts in which the face is aimed up, because almost everyone was covering their face or laying down on their stomach and trying to cover their face in their last moment when their position was finally frozen. This guy is actively in the middle of a climb. It's like he's reaching for someone. One of his arms is broken, and they believe that it happened that day. It either happened while they were trying to escape, or it happened shortly after he died. And his compressed bones make them believe that he was a laborer and some kind of merchant. A few bodies down from there, there is a mother holding a child. There are two other children near her, two boys. One is 5, one is 2. And then there's a second family, a presumed family. It's a man and a woman with a young child that is 12 to 14 months old, and the youngest victim that they discovered in the remains. And then a teenager, they call him the servant, but that's just because he's carrying a bag full of stuff. So who knows?
I'd like to think I'd be a man of science if I were them, but I don't know how you're not just like, God hates us.
Yeah.
This is God's wrath. I get it. And I'd be like, well, you can't explain this when we're all being frozen
Well,
in ash.
and let's look at the time, too. I mean, this is 79 AD. So Christianity exists, and people are starting to figure out how you're
Jesus,
going to describe hell in the end of the
missed
world.
it. He
And
just missed
he
it.
just darn it.
He would have had a heyday with this one.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about miracles.
They're like, you're well. That was my dad.
She's pissed.
That was my dad.
He's a real man?
Yeah.
Ooh.
So these guys, now they weren't found. The picture that you're probably going to see is the way that the fugitives are laid out in the site right now. That's not the way that they were necessarily found. As we pointed out earlier, all of these remains had to be removed from the excavation site. If you go and follow our links, though, you can see pictures of them as they were discovered. They were found at all various decades and sometimes even centuries. So the photographs of the site vary, but it is fascinating. Okay, the next plaster casts I want to show you. Oh, honey, look.
They're so sweet.
They're the lovers. 2 adults laying on their sides, facing each other. One of them has their head sort of pressed into the chest of the other one, and their arms are kind of intertwined. This, of course, was labeled at first the lovers. And our buddy Miorelli was again like, you can tell this is a female because of her shapely legs. And this is long before they had the ability to actually like scan them and test bones and such, you know. So they were named the lovers, and everyone immediately was like, clearly they were probably running away together, young and passionate, and they couldn't go with their parents. The parents wouldn't allow, you know. And then they were like, did the proper testing, and they were like, okay, so one of them's definitely a woman. And then they were like, no, they're both men. So then, of course, the narrative has to switch immediately. We can't just see two men in an embrace like this in any century since we've discovered.
They're fighting. One of them stole an apple.
This guy is having a bad tussle with his brother. And they were like, no, they're not related. It's not a father-son, and they're not in any way related. So there's just two unrelated young men in an embrace that seem to be universally one of endearment.
The bachelor farmer of Pompeii.
Yeah, we just don't know. Nobody, and it's so... proof yet again in so many other arenas how, like, even when you portend to be, wish you were, think you are an objective scientific mind, you go, well, I don't know what's happening there. And instead, like, in what century, in what date, present or future, will we be able to just be like two human beings in the midst of their own mortality cling to each other? How's that?
Yeah, I mean, it works, but
we can't. We gotta know. We
Yeah,
gotta know
we
who's fucking who and what their proclivity
it's
is.
it's my second question. Entering a room.
That's probably why you're not good at small talk, because you go, "What's everyone's
Who's
sexual?"
fucking who?
Have you two ever fucked though? Like, you're not fucking now, but have you ever fucked before?
I don't care much for these babies. I gotta be honest. I don't. You know, ever since having a kid, I don't have much of a stomach for this kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's hard.
Suffering.
He's looking at the family, and this is the family picture that I brought up, is the one that we saw when we went into the exhibit. If you remember, we actually waited in line with a bunch of hot other people and walked down these graded steps and went into a building where there were the figures.
I don't remember this.
And we saw this one. We
I
have
remember
a
the
picture.
fella or the person
Yeah.
rocking back and forth there.
We
I
have
think
a-
I saw the baby from far away and actively avoided it.
Yeah, because I have a picture of Beatrice, my baby, looking at the dead baby, and it was all very dark. So hot.
So hot.
So dark.
They
But
don't have air
this-
conditioning that very well
No.
in lots of Europe, which is part of the reason it's a big problem
Yeah.
when you're over there. And it's a cool 80 inside.
It is such a predicament to be deeply, deeply interested in the history, profoundly personally moved by the devastating scene you are seeing of a mother, father, and young child being torched to death on this very spot that you're standing, with a bunch of people also in sort of a somber, like we're in church sort of mood, and just thinking to yourself, I'm suffering too much.
Yeah, this is too much for me.
This is too much. I am having undue suffering.
I need a drink.
I gotta go.
I need a drink.
Yeah, the folks that we looked at, it again, if you're plastering a storyline, and one can hardly help it, it appears to me a man and a woman. They're both on their backs with their arms up. One of them has a child resting on her chest, and the child is rearing up and appears to be reaching out toward the other adult, who appears to be reaching up and out to that same child. As if in the very last moment of pain and agony, they all just went, come here, let me come to you. And and then there's one sad little child all by itself. Next to them looks about, I don't know the age of our child. It's devastating. Frozen forever in a moment of panic, fear, agony, and death. Now let's look at the dog. If it's not quite hurting enough, there's the dog. On its back, you can see its collar.
Oh my God, it has a collar.
Yeah. You can see its teeth and its toes and its little collar.
I don't know, like, that's like the pose in which our dog finds most relaxing. So this.
Speaking of somebody finding themselves most relaxing, I've just shown my husband the picture of perhaps my favorite plaster cast person. A nice way to put a button on this whole section here.
When did you get this picture of me?
Can you guess what the archaeologists have named this friend?
Sir Crankslot.
Cranksus Maximus.
Hold on, I got more.
Oh. Go ahead. Go wild, baby.
I don't know. I'll work it. There's some pasta jokes. You know what I mean? Like
There's some hard as a rock.
Yeah, he's
this
like
guy,
working
here's our friend.
working the linguine. I don't, you know.
Here's what I'll tell you about
proud
this
of
guy.
any of that.
He's laying on his back, one leg straight out, one leg is bent. One arm seems to be in recline with his elbow rested down, and the other hand firmly affixed around his cock. And his head is sort of elevated, and I don't know, his expression, I've seen worse. I looked at a lot of these dead guys, and I'm telling you, this face, I've seen worse faces in this face.
I can't imagine. It's all coming down, and you're just like, let me just crank one out quick.
I mean, it seems to be the biggest question. Now, the first question when you look at Sir Masturbator is this guy jerking off in the middle of, is the hot pyroclast about to cook him 750-degree poisonous gas?
way.
And he laid down and was like, I know exactly what to do.
I think that like
Or
something fell on him.
something fell on him. Or, I mean, the ones you see, their bodies are all contorted because this gas had some sort of possible neurological sort of factor in that last minute.
Yeah, there's a neurological thing that caused him to move his hand.
And like, what a bummer. I mean, it's been 2,000 years.
This dude.
And this guy's, it was
Just
it's a
forever.
spasm. It was just a spasm.
a
That's what he's
spasm.
yelling. It was a spasm.
Do you think, this is so terrible, in his like last seconds, he was just like, they're going to think I was, and then... and just
I don't know.
the fleeting feeling of
Maybe.
just it's like it's the Pompeii equivalent of your porn drawer after you die. You know,
Yeah.
like you can't have these. I say to
And
say
let's
magazines because
no.
that's the funnier example. But you need to clean your history out. Don't be the Pompeii guy.
Don't be the
people.
Pompeii guy. Or you got to be like, did the universe and all of its unfair devastation that day at least let this guy come before? Was there... Because he seems fairly content, but he also seems pretty in the throes of it there.
That's not a man in repose.
No.
It's very tense.
Yeah. Yeah. But these are yet some of the mysteries. And listen, this guy fits right in, though, because as you pointed out in the book, there are dicks all over Pompeii. Pompeii, in addition to these amazing dead people and the art and the sculptures and the marble and the architecture and all of these ancient... Because keep in mind, anytime you find anything from the ancient classical era, people, historians, nerds like me, are going to lose their fucking shit because we lost the vast, vast, vast majority of writing and art from these many centuries. They were lost by natural disasters. They were lost by wars. They were lost by later Christians who just destroyed and burned and deliberately tried to erase a lot of this stuff from our history. So when we find, and there are some scrolls, they appear to be, it seems impossible, but they can actually sort of maybe see inside and get some fragmented writing from these scrolls. It's all very exciting. But there is a lot of sex all over Pompeii. It's in the art. It's in private homes. It's in public houses. It's on street facades. As my daughter said, walking through Italy, they love butts.
We used to live in a society, apparently. Obviously, a bunch of prudes came through and
But
were
listen,
like, you can't do this.
No,
We
but
can't
check this
have
out. You want to know who the biggest prudes were? This is one of my favorites. Were the prudes who went down in that initial well bucket in the 1700s, okay?
Mm-hmm.
We're talking King Charles III. He is king, technically, of Italy when all of this stuff first comes up. And they are like, Your Majesty, there's a lot of spat down. I mean, you can't get away from it. The boobs, butts, penises, and erotic... explicit sex acts are all over.
There's penetration. This
all
is real.
over Pompeii. So do you know what they did? They had a literal, get this, in the 1700s, they literally put it in a closet. They took the art off the walls without any real regard for preservation, these fucks. They cut the stones off the wall. They took the nastiest statues and the most disturbing images, and they made it forbidden. And the only people who could ever see it were men, of course, and men with position, and they had to have a really important reason.
Sure.
To go look at it. It's just so devastating as a historian that they would have compromised these artifacts because they cover their women's ankles. God.
This is, what are these things they say? Felix, you fuck well.
Oh, yeah.
Phoebus the
Wait, no, I'm going to get to
perfumer.
that.
Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
that's the graffiti. Oh, baby, you found my favorite part.
It's the bathroom stall.
Yeah, you found my favorite, because they could preserve, right, so much of this stuff. And a lot of it is what is on the walls, the graffiti you're reading. But also check this out. Let's see. Oh, I want to show you. Go to the page. There we go. Okay, my darling, I have directed you to a page with a specific erotic image. This is from the House of Centenary. It is the Forbidden Chamber. So they would often have, like in Pompeii, nudes were everywhere, but explicit sex acts in art were still generally private. They were in rooms that you had to go through several rooms to get to. They were, blocked off from the public. They were bedrooms. They were brothels, okay? This one was in the Forbidden Chamber of what they call the House of Centenary. It's a huge mural. It is a picture of two nude adults. The female is straddling the male. She appears to be grabbing his member and helping guide him in there while he watches.
Is that what that is?
That if you need me to say it slower,
We'll be right back.
And get this, in this room where that mural is, there's a peephole so that someone outside of that chamber can observe what goes on in that chamber. Girl, the kinky. And you found the page with all the sex acts where it's, two guys on girl. We got group. We got toys. We got gay. We got oral. We got all the Kama Sutra was oh, damn. Now there's mystery religions too, where there's kinky. Some of the kinkiest art you're going to see is in these cult religions. So it appears that Pompeii and the areas around it were generally very religiously diverse. They were Roman, but they weren't intolerant of the old Greek gods because this Pompeii was already old in 79 AD. There were apparently settlements there 800 BC. So this place had been around for a minute. And in my favorite one, it's called the Villa of Mysteries. I have it labeled there. Okay, they found this place in 1909. Look at the colors of this mural. It is this deep, dark red background. They didn't do anything to heighten these colors. It was how it looked when they exposed it. Dark, beautiful red background. And it's life size. So if you walk into the room with these murals, the figures on the walls are, the size of you. And it shows sort of panel by panel what they assume is the ritual of initiation into this secret cult. And they believe it is the cult of Dionysus, who is the god of wine and mystic ecstasy.
I'm in.
Exactly. It attracts mostly women, but you're welcome. And there's pictures of it, they're naked, they're getting whipped, they're getting washed. It's all very exciting. And here's
there's a fellow with little elf ears playing a flute.
Sure, that would be Pan. And the wonderful
I was going to say
thing
a pan
is,
flute, but I was self-conscious.
You would have been correct. And that mural is so famous that if you're a real nerd like me and you're watching Sandman on Netflix, when the god of dreams goes to Hades and talks to Lucifer, Lucifer's chamber is painted with the exact portraits from the Villa of Mysteries, which I was ooh, that was some good. That was a nice little Easter egg for us nerds. I like that. Okay, now you saw the graffiti. Oh, Melby. So graffiti is this perfect HILF for us, and especially in this podcast, because it's just exactly the kind of history I want to fuck. To see graffiti that was written in 79 AD at the latest, most of this graffiti, some of it dates back to 100 BC, is awesome because not only is it ancient writing, which I already told you, anytime you find any ancient writing, it's amazing. What makes it increasingly rare is that it's common people. These are people who were never going to have a scroll in a library, even if it didn't burn down in Alexandria. You know what I mean? These are just your common people who are mostly writing logs of their thoughts. You're hearing the common language. It's so fascinating. So here's what blew me away. Some of this stuff is exactly what our kind of graffiti would be. So Gaius Pomidius Duplicitus was here on the 3rd of October in the year when Marcus Lepidus had Quantus Catullus, and that apparently was 88 BC. Ogg loves Aletonius. Of course it does. Lucilla was making money from her body. So basically, 2,000 years ago, we were like, I was here. I love this guy. Lucilla's a whore. Also, very much like Next Door. Here's the ones that sounded like ancient Next Door to me. A brass pot disappeared from this shop.
Oh my God.
If anyone brings it back, they'll be rewarded. Another one said, I hate poor people. Anyone who asks for anything is a fool.
Wow.
Another one says Marcellus loves Prestinia and is not loved in return. Oh. And another one said Antinomus got me pregnant. So
Join the club.
now here's some that caught your eye, my most precious darling, that also were graffiti that helped solidify the fact that the areas they were scratched in were either brothels or sort of brothel adjacent, right? Anyone who wants to fuck should ask for Addis. Okay? I fucked many girls here.
Great.
Good
job.
for you.
Good job.
Felix, you fuck well.
Can you imagine Felix walking up like, all right.
Felix, especially now, 2,000 years later, it's like, go on, Felix.
It's great feedback.
Thanks, ladies. Phoebus the perfumer fucks the best.
Take that, Felix.
Like, all right,
Just-
Phoebus comes around with his etching tool. That fuck. It's amazing. I think it's
Scordo Pordinicus had a good fuck with whoever he wanted here. Jeez.
damn.
Scordo. Watch out,
to go.
Scordo's here.
Right?
This is Draca. I was fucked here. That's a pretty clear statement. Good
Right,
job.
that fuck was. You're like that fuck was great. I want
Let me put
everyone to
this on the
know.
wall.
I'm gonna write this down.
You don't even know who it is. Just that's for you.
That's for you.
That's
You're like,
for
I
you.
want to
just
remember. Where
wanna-
did I get that good fucking? I
That's
don't.
right
Oh,
here.
there it is. I made a thing. I mean, but this is what's so nuts is I feel like, especially once you get the further and further you get into Pompeii, it's impossible not to see a mirror. Like it's a 2,000-year-old funhouse mirror.
I'm seeing many images of myself on this page.
Especially Mr. 10-foot dick getting weighed against coins. But I mean, that's us. It's everything. It's our bodies. It's our houses. It's our toilet stalls. It's our grievances. It's our taverns. And you just like, you look at it and you're like, well, it seems like literally ancient history. And it's exactly my town. And it begs the question I want to ask you. What would you be as an artifact? Whether you want to imagine, and it's not hard for us to imagine in our day and age, a natural disaster. I mean, you and I live above the San Andreas fault. It's fucking half a century overdue for the big one. And I think that we all maybe take a minute to imagine our room is suddenly dipped into a time capsule. And 2,000 years later, some archaeologist is digging us up. What conceptions about us do they get right or wrong? Because you can be found slumped over a copy machine, and you're going to be office man. Nobody gives a fuck that you kayaked and brewed beer. You know what I mean? It's a guy who was having sex with a copier. It's like, fuck. But I think the same
He's fucking
misconception.
the copier?
I mean,
I just
it
assumed they
depends
were
on the
making
archaeologist.
copies.
If there's, what if like it's found
That's
in like a
true.
future where like we're fucking robots? Like the only thing on
That
everybody's
future
heads
is now, by the way.
is everyone's like robophobia, and they can't help but look at you slumped over a copier through the lens of their own robophobia.
There's an early adapter here. That's what they'd call it, an early adapter.
They'd be like, "This is see guys, it is natural." Because even 2,000 years ago, people put their dicks in there.
Earliest adaptus. Fuckus xeroxus.
I think But then there's also the kind of artifacts that are like the sad present day reality, which is your sister has to go through your goddamn hard drive and try to piece together who you are based on your journal entry. And you're like, well, I only wrote when I was pissed off.
Yeah.
You know, so of course everyone's going to think I'm mad, but I only ever sat down and wrote when I was so mad I couldn't stand it. And, you know, I feel like it sort of gives you an appreciation for how intricate and complicated everybody is and how quick it is to oversimplify something because it fits into a category.
I don't know how I'm going to answer that. I mean, like a hypothetical scenario. Like what would synthesize me or what would be most likely?
Yeah, I don't know. Either one. I mean, there was this one guy, for example, one of the plaster casts, some guy, he was found with a sword. So he's the soldier.
Just fighting it?
Yeah, no, he's just holding a sword. They're just like he's a dead guy with a sword, so he's the soldier. I get like,
yeah.
oh great, you know, or a woman with a child. You're the mother. But I think that happens. We see it now in these historical snapshots. But I think we're doing that all the time. I think anytime we see a woman with a child, we assume that's the mother. Do you know what I mean? It's just like this sort of kind of extension of what are already kind of false perceptions.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm trying to think. I'd probably be in the kitchen. To be like, cook us pizzas.
Cook us pizzas. I will be probably there'll be a lot of cannabis around me. So they'll be like,
That's
she
what
was
I was gonna
made.
say. I was gonna let you get there by yourself, so I didn't.
They'd be like, this woman loved cannabis, and I'd be like, well done, archaeologists.
Correct. And they'd probably find me adjacent to you. This man loved this woman who loved cannabis.
Yes, I think that we would make a lovely plaster cast family.
I think we would.
I think that people would love my shapely legs. No, you know what? There's this one place I was researching for a while that got me sort of in my cannabis philosophical. There's the House of Menander. And I was like, ooh, and it's like the most gorgeous estate in Pompeii. It is the biggest and richest house. They do not know who owned it. They assume all these things. Maybe a politician. They were obviously rich. They may be a trader. Like maybe they have no idea who lived in this house. But it is, the wealth and the opulence of this place is incredible. And there were a couple of bodies found in like the back garden. That they make the presumptions. They had a little ring on. Maybe this person was a servant or whatever. And I was like, why do they call it the House of Menander if they didn't know who the fuck it was? Like, where did that name come from? And it was because there was a fresco and a mural of a poet named Menander, and he exists, and some of his poetry exists, so they just picked the one thing that they could name and named the whole house after it.
Right.
And it struck me that perhaps there was some justice in history, that it doesn't matter who bought this house, who was the master of this house ultimately. It is the art contained in it and the humans in the building that are ultimately remembered. But then I was like, well, I don't want to, but then fuck it. I don't want to be remembered. I would like to, if I was in Pompeii, I would rather survive and be totally forgotten.
Absolutely.
It's definitely like, careful what you wish for. I wish everyone in the world will remember me. I want to be remembered for all of history. In 2,000 years, I want them to be looking at my face and thinking about me. And you're like, okay, cool. Here's how that's going to happen. You're going to be burned in 750-degree hot, torturous gas and then buried under ash, 20 feet of ash for several thousand years. And then the way they're going to look at you is in just like grief. And you'll be like, oh.
And then some idiots with microphones thousands of years later, like,
what about you?
jerk it off.
I think the guy's jerking off.
Yeah, that guy
will
was
say,
like,
too,
right before he went, he was like, I will be remembered.
I will be remembered.
I'm not just gonna. To be fair, if you're curled up, or you're on your back,
Yeah.
my man made a choice, and it was a choice.
It was a choice.
And he stands out.
He's
pun
a
intended
pleasant
from the crowd.
Also, like, if any place needs a little comic relief, it's fucking
Do you remember
Pompeii.
curl up person number 3?
No.
Because they're curled up person.
Remember,
number 3.
remember they're covering their face. They look really sad and like they're really hurt. And his leg was, you're like, do you remember the guy grabbing his hog?
That's right, I do.
And the dog.
And the dog, it's because the dog's on his
The dog.
back.
I will say this though: if anyone's ass belongs in a museum, baby, it's that ass.
Oh goodness!
I hope it's not in a pyroclastic blast, but
I've seen that movie.
anyway, we need to get that ass in a museum, girl. I'll be part of it. Also, a reminder that we need to upgrade our earthquake kit. We should make sure the batteries are good.
And we
stuff.
need a generator.
Okay. Hey, I love you somehow even more than I did an hour ago.
I love you too. Great job. This was fascinating.
Thanks, baby. Yuck. Nothing like a love fest at the end of the world, huh? Now, I hope you enjoyed sitting down with us and hilfing ancient history for a while. We have new episodes every other Wednesday, and if this one gave you nightmares, maybe the next one will help put them in Technicolor. It's the history of horror movies with guest comedian and professional hacker Jose Barrientos. From silent film to Nope, we'll talk about what scares us, why, and how it has changed over time. Our theme song was composed and performed by Kat Perkins and Eric Warner. And a reminder that you can find my sources, links to books, documentaries, and the articles I reference in the summary of this episode, or by emailing us, hilfpodcast@gmail.com, or messaging us on social media @hilfpodcast. This has been Hilf, History I'd Like to Fuck with Dawn Brody. I'm Dawn Brody, reminding you that history is a party, and everybody's coming. Okay.
Hey, Mom, wait. Butts.
Yeah, boy, there were a lot of butts